Hi guys, it's Jen here, and I want to show you some really cool things that you can do with your sewing machine. Now, you don't need a whole lot of fancy stuff to do what I'm going to show you. There's a lot of things that you could do with texture on fabric, okay? And maybe you don't know this, maybe you've never done it, but I'm going to show you couching today, which is also sometimes called braiding. But this is a really easy technique to do, and it gives us some really good dimension and texture to your projects. So you only need a few things. Obviously you need a sewing machine. My particular machine that I'm using today has decorative stitches on it. You could just use a zigzag. So if you just have a zigzag on your machine, it works great with a zigzag. You are going to need a special presser foot, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And you need yarn of some sort. I'm just using regular knitting yarn here. You could get the DC floss that you cross stitch with if you're into that kind of hand sewing, you know, the 4-letter word. I don't do that, but maybe you do, so you've got some lying around. You can use that, any type of cording at all, any thick yarn, and then you need some thread, obviously. You're going to sew with decorative threads work well, like the sulky cotton 30 weight, 12 weight threads. I'm using embroidery thread today. It just contrasts with my yarn that I'm using, and you'll see what it looks like. So let's get started. Okay, so first I'm going to show you, this is the special presser foot I was talking about. This one for a baby lock is called a braiding foot. What it does is it has a hole in the front here. So you can actually feed your yarn or cording right through that hole, and then it goes underneath your presser foot and pull it to the back. Leave a short tail. Actually, leave a longer tail, because if you leave too short of a tail, what happens is you end up pulling it out on accident. Ask me how I know that. I've done it like 50 million times. So longer tail is better. So I just attached that, threaded my yarn through there. I have my machine threaded with pink embroidery thread, and I'm ready to go. First thing I have to do is select a decorative stitch. That's going to take a while, but don't worry, I've already pre-selected it, so you don't have to sit here and wait for me to scroll through 700 different stitches. There's all kinds of different decorative stitches on these machines, and you guys need to play around with them to see what looks good and what doesn't. I've also altered the width and length of this particular stitch, so it works really nicely. And let me show you what it looks like. So if you can see, I'm barely holding the yarn. The machine is just feeding it through, and that hole in the presser foot allows my yarn to stay straight. So I really don't even have to think about it. All right, so I'm sewing along, and I'm going to start getting crafty and moving this fabric so you can see that my yarn stays where it needs to be and my decorative stitches cover it. So you gotta do, it's a little tricky. I mean, practice this at home on your machine. You'll get good at it. It's just like anything else, you gotta practice. All right, so you can use this technique to go around appliques. You could use it to just embellish your fabric. You can create your own fabric, kind of like what I'm doing here. So I started with the solid. I'm adding all kinds of different decorative stitches and colors. So these are a couple different things that you can use couching for. I'm going to finish this stitch off here. Okay, so I have selected a different stitch now because I just want you to see what it looks like. And remember, you can play around with your decorative stitches, and I encourage you to do so. A lot of those stitches are just sitting there really lonely because you never pull them out. They want to be used too, just like your straight stitch and your zigzag. I know you guys use those all the time. Now, if you notice on this stitch, my fabric is actually being moved from right to left. This is a trait of this machine. It doesn't just feed your fabric straight and back, it actually goes side to side, okay? So not all machines can do this, but the Baby Lock does. So like I said, most feed dogs move your fabric front to back. This machine is actually going to move it side to side and forward. So my needle plate opening is 7 millimeters on this machine, which is typically the width of your stitch. But because my fabric can move side to side, I can get a stitch that's like 28 millimeters. For instance, this stitch here, if you could see that, that's much wider than my needle plate opening. So play with those stitches, girls and boys. Your machine has them, so you should be using them. Okay, so let's see what this looks like. I'm going to use my scissors. So now you can see that we've got all kinds of texture on there because we've got the yarn underneath. Play around with it. I mean, you have so many stitches there. Play around with different types of threads, different types of yarn or cording. You're going to get a lot of different looks there. Play around with color. There's a lot you can do with this. So go home, run to your machine, and play. Your machine wants you to use this stuff, so go home and use it. Next, I'm going to show you some samples of different jackets and ways of using this technique and apply it to a project. All right, this is a jacket that I made, and I want you to look really close at this. Some of these stitches are just, you're just looking at the cording. So I used an invisible thread. You're not going to be able to see this on camera because it's invisible. That's the whole point of invisible thread. But it's a zigzag right over that cording. So what happens is your yarn or your cording shows up. So you'll see all the different sparkles in here. This one has those little, what do they call them? The feathers or eyelet yarn. So I don't do any knitting, but if I have yarn in my house, you bet this is what I'm doing with it. I don't have patience for knitting. But you can get a lot of different techniques and texture by mixing up your yarns and your threads. Even this one here, you'll see that that has some dimension to it. So I've got all kinds of other samples. This is just the first one. It's a reversible jacket. Again, you can punch up your fabric by adding couching to it. Because the polka dot was a little bit boring to me, so I thought, why not add all these decorative yarns to it. I thought it made it look nice, and I hope you think so too. Here's another example of a jacket that was first pieced, so all these little squares were sewn together, and then the embellishing was done on top. So we've combined embroidery with decorative stitches by themselves, decorative stitches over yarn, all kinds of different techniques, different fabrics, different threads. This is a lot of work right here. But it really turns out gorgeous when you're done with it. It's something you could be really proud of, and everyone's going to ask you and stop you when you're out wearing it. Who did that? How did you do it? So this is definitely a technique that you want to get good at and add to your projects. You're going to get a lot of praise for this kind of stuff. So here's another jacket. This is the front here. It's got all kinds of couching, decorative stitches, and if you look real close, I'm not sure you're going to be able to see this, but there's itty bitty little beads on here. Talk about a lot of work. This must have taken forever. I did not make this sample, but the girl that did, she did a lot of work and she did an amazing job. So in this particular sample, you'll see that the yarn she uses has these little knobbies. So it's real thin, and then you get this big fuzzy, and then it's real thin again. This adds some nice texture to it because it almost looks like she just added pieces of yarn in random places, but it's actually the nature of the yarn. So you can use different textures of yarn, you can use different weights of yarn, and for those of you that don't have decorative stitches on your machine, this is all zigzag right here. So you could do that with a zigzag as well. And again, she added beading on here. This girl has the patience of a saint. All kinds of beading on here. It just gives it a little bit more sparkle and again, texture. I love texture, and obviously so does she. But you guys can take this home, start practicing your decorative stitching, your couching, and play around. I want to see these samples. Post them on our group. I'm really excited and look forward to what you guys are going to do.